use to build your future crews and assignments, and how you can diversify that emergency or...
Thank you for that. Thanks, William. Okay, we all set? We are good to go. All right, so I've already introduced David Lashley, and we've got Steve McMasters as well. So I will let you guys take it away. If you have questions, kind of raise your hand and I'll run over and hand you the mic, or you can enter them on the app.
Do you want to start? No. Okay, he's going to let me start. Okay, so let me just further introduce myself. My name is David Lashley, and once upon a time, I got a call from a utility contractor called Volt Power, headquartered out of Atlanta, Georgia, doing business from Texas all the way to Virginia on a bunch of different systems, on the Entergy system, Encore, Florida Power and Light, on a lot of municipal co-ops. And they needed help internally implementing a software system called ARCOS. And they needed to marry it into the workflow that worked for their company and working on all these different systems. So I joined kind of mid-implementation, met Steve and the ARCOS team, and began working with crews in the field, with the leadership in Volt, to try to understand what this workflow looked like and how to build it based on a core centered around ARCOS. So the agenda for today, do we have a slide clicker to go to the...
Ooh, you should have that somewhere.
Anybody know how to go to the next slide? Okay, thank you. So I put this little abstract together that I'm not going to talk through. You can read through and see what we're going to talk about. But thank you. Okay. The essence was, how do we get work into the system? How do we get work out of the system? And how do we report back to all our utilities in the format that they want to see the data in? Which, if you're from the utility, that's not your problem, right? You've got one system. If you're a contractor, you've got to work potentially on multiple different systems, and you've got to package this data, and you've got to do it in a timely fashion. And of course, everything Darren said from AEP earlier this morning applies. We're trying to put it into practice and did put it into practice. And then everything has been building to this, because when I left Volt Power, we finished our implementation. They had the system up and running, and they were using it for unit work. They had prototyped it for fixed bid construction work, transmission work, and they were also using it for joint use, to go out and say, hey, AT&T is on this pole, Comcast is on this pole, et cetera. So what I want to do is just kind of walk through that workflow and kind of tell you a story as we go. When I joined Volt Power, I was told that I'm going to be working with, they call them pirates. And their pirate ships are these bucket trucks that they go around on, and they have, their certain way of running their crew. They've got a certain personality, a certain rhythm, a certain cadence to what they do. And be careful when you just show up from the front office, because they don't want to talk to you. They want to put poles in the ground. They want to string wire. Everything that we're talking about here, these wonderful productivity improvements and all that, it's just a task that they have to perform. And when I showed up the first time and I handed somebody an iPad, we're actually doing training on the side of the road, because we don't want downtime. We don't want to take them out of the field. And you hand it to them, and the reaction was not initially positive. It was negative, because they said, oh my gosh, now I've got something else I have to do. So in addition to this big stack of paper I have in the cab and scrawling all these notes around, what are the write-ups or whatever, and trying to keep track of all that, well, now they've got this iPad they've got to deal with. And it's not until they fully realize and understand that you're not giving them something new to do, you're taking stuff away by doing this. So these hand-scrawled notes, those write-ups that are on those job packs that are written on every page, or trying to open prints in the rain in a truck or whatever, you don't have to do that anymore. We're going to get it all into this iPad. We're going to push a job to you. You're going to get your permits. You're going to get your prints, you're going to get the design of the job. Everything is going to come through the ARCOS system. The general foreman is going to construct this job in the back office. He's going to, through crew manager, be able to pick the crew that we're going to assign it to and shoot it right out there into the field. And as Darren said earlier, they get a pop-up that shows up on their device, hey, you've got a new job on ARCOS. And you go in and you look at it, and you'll see a job list. And Steve is up here with his technology, because when we get finished talking about it, we're actually going to show it to you, how it works, what the screens look like. We're going to show you how to attach a photo and why all this stuff is so important. And I'll just give you one more little anecdote. I was working on the side of the road with these guys in FPL, and in Florida, they get into a lot of situations where they can't machine dig a hole. So the job instruction is going to come from FPL, and it's automatically going to say machine dig this. And they get out there, and for whatever reason they can't, so they start hand digging. You got a guy with a set of post hole diggers, and he's there, and he's going through, God knows what material in the ground. And as a contractor, we're going to be paid more for that. So that's a write-up for us to be able to do it. But you've also got to have a photo of it. You got to have a guy standing there with a post hole digger in his hand with a hole in the photo, and you've got to label that photo in order to be paid for that work. So Volt was having a tremendously difficult time keeping all of this straight. They've got to not only record the write-up for it, but they've got to document with a photo. They've got to know where the photo is when it's time to upload all that into FPL's work management system. So they were losing information. Job packs were riding around in trucks for an amazing amount of time. We were having trouble closing out jobs, and we were having trouble getting paid properly. And there was an analysis done that said maybe 30% of the revenue that we would get on these unit jobs came from write-ups. And in order to be profitable, you've got to keep track of all this stuff. And at the end of the day, I'll jump right to the conclusion of the presentation. What was Volt trying to accomplish by rolling out this system? We wanted to make sure that all our crews were profitable. So at the end of the day, if we have electronic timesheet information, which we implemented from ARCOS as well, and we have construction information, and we've got cost information on those crews, and we've got equipment information, crew manager, all feeding into a calculation, we can determine almost on a daily basis, well really on a daily basis, what the P&L of each of our crews was. Which, as a utility, you probably don't have to do that. But as a contractor, if you want to be profitable, you've got to be able to do that. Because when we started, we had crews that were consistently costing us more than they were bringing in terms of revenue. And so you have to identify who those crews are, and then you're able, with that information, to go out and figure out, how do I make them profitable? Are they spending too much time in the yard? Does it take them too much time to load up? Are they not loading up for tomorrow at the end of the day, so they're not ready to roll in the morning? So instead of rolling out there at 6:30 in the morning, they're rolling out at 10 in the morning. So, and as Darren said, how many hours are we actually getting where these guys can turn a wrench? So it's incredibly critical for us if we wanted to be operating income positive to get a handle on all this stuff. So the workflow that we built starts with a job that's designed by a utility. Could be an FPL job, could be an energy job. And when those jobs come into our system, they look totally different. The documentation that comes from energy, it doesn't look anything like FP&L. So the little arrow with the twist in it there represents the process that we had to go through to translate, or what Steve would say is parsing those jobs. We need to get it into a tabular, Excel-based looking format that ARCOS speaks. And ARCOS built some parsing engines for us in the beginning for FPL, for Pedernales Electrical Cooperative. But then we determined that we wanted to be a little independent. We wanted to be able to go in, and if a customer changes the format of a job instruction, we'd like to be able to just go ahead and change it without having to put an engineering request into ARCOS. So we found a third-party documentation service that would allow us to build parsing rules that could take PDF files or other types of files and do exactly what I said, put it into a tabular format that then ARCOS could go in via API and pull right into their system. So that was the key to getting information into and out of the system quickly. At the same time, we had another online tool. We used something called Monday.com. It's a competitor of Smartsheets, and it allowed us to organize all the work, because we needed to know when a job was ready, when we had MOT complete, if we had to have equipment, a crane on site or something like that. We needed all of this coordinated because we wanted to make sure that we didn't have crews sitting around waiting because they didn't have what they needed. So ultimately, what they will do is integrate that into ARCOS so that when a job is ready to work, we could automatically transfer it over into the system. So these are what I would call the inputs to the workbench system. That's the responsibility of the contractor to put together. So then we move into the back office, and depending on what presentations you've sat in, you've seen the back office already. It connects to Crew Manager. It allows us to pull in all the crews that we have to build the job in the system. Not only would we scan and parse the job instructions, the labor summary, whatever you want to call it, of all the units and all the locations that need to be performed, but then we would attach documents as well, so that the foreman has got a print that's going to be available on his iPad. If there are any special forms, switching orders might be attached as well, so that they've got all the documents they need. And then when they're out in the field, in the last presentation I sat in, Alabama Power was mentioning that they've got some PDF forms that they can connect to via SharePoint, and their foreman can pull those forms off. We did the same thing. On the FPL system, they had something called non-unit time, that you had to fill a form out in order to be able to be compensated for, say you're sitting around, because no fault of the crew, because the utility has made some kind of a change or is responsible for that time. So we designed clickable PDF forms that could be completed on the iPad and then attached to the job in ARCOS. And ultimately, when our unit writers got a hold of these jobs at the end, they had all the photos, they had all of the write-ups, the write-downs, quantity changes, brand new units that were added to the job because we got out there, we looked at the poll, and we said, hey, there's something missing in the way the job was originally designed. So everything that was required to submit to the utility is in one place. And instead of job packets riding around in the truck for 3 weeks, they're there. It also addressed the issue of, in the contractor world, I'm sure you all know this, there's a lot of turnover. Whole crews leave and go to another system, to another contractor. And the record retention was a very big deal for us and was a deal breaker in invoicing a lot of these jobs. And if you can't prove you had the write-ups, then at best you're going to settle with the utility for par, which is the way the job was designed in the first place. And when 30% of your revenue is coming from write-ups, it's pretty essential to keep that straight. So once the job was designed in Mobile Workbench, we'd push it out to the crew, and then the crew starts to interact with it. And the Workbench system will load every unit that we have on that contract into, I call it the unit catalog. So when you're a contractor, we've got 4,000 lines of units from the FPL system, and we've got thousands of lines of other units that come from other contractors, and Workbench is keeping all of those straight for us. So when we load a job on the FPL system, the foreman receives that job along with the entire unit catalog for FP&L. So when they go to look for a write-up, they go to a simple search bar that Steve will demonstrate, and they say, hey, I need a hand dig. And it pulls up the unit, we select it, we're doing the work hot or cold, and boom, it's now added to the job. And it takes literally just seconds to do. So the Mobile Workbench system, for us, I think it's easier to see up here. It's allowing us to capture photos, it's sending all the documents out there, it's keeping everything in one place, it's allowing us to do annotations, it's allowing us to put notes in as well. And when we finished this implementation, we weren't done. Like all of ARCOS, there's always a way to improve. Right? So our foremen were feeding us back information and saying, hey, right now we carry a little whiteboard with us. And when we stand in front of that hole to indicate that this is a hand dig, we write hand dig, we write the location on it, and then we stand there and we say cheese and we take the picture. So somebody said, we'd love to get rid of those little whiteboards. Could you just give us a feature in the ARCOS tool so we can add a note to a photo? And so that's one of the things that goes on our list that Steve and his team were actively working on. So let's talk a little bit about, hit one button too many, okay. So let's talk a little bit about getting data out of the system. Again, not exactly as an intense an effort for a utility as it is for a contractor, where in the case of Entergy, let's say, at the end of a job, our general foreman has to sit down with our program lead, and they're going to review that job, and they're going to go through write-ups and write-downs, essentially, because they're not going to approve it unless they think it was warranted. So first we'd print out a set of documentation that had the format they need to review the job. And then once we get approval from Entergy, the same information needs to be entered into a change order. So the way that that happened for us is we wound up putting a Azure SQL database on the back end of this so that we could take all the data out of the ARCOS system. And then for Entergy, we could go in and say, hey, we're pulling an energy job, here's the job number, and it comes out formatted exactly the way it needs to be. If we're pulling job information out for a muni or a co-op, it gave us the ability to go in and create all this custom documentation in just a few hours and have it look exactly like what the utility expected. Because when you're a contractor, you're going to play by the utilities rules. So we were able to do that for engineering documentation, produce those formats that they needed. We were able to do invoicing out of the system because we've got all the units, we've got all the pricing loaded into ARCOS, and we could actually directly create those invoices. Pedernales Electrical Cooperative was a perfect example of that. You'd go in, put a job number in, you'd put in some pertinent information about the name of the crew leader, the invoice number, contract number, hit a button, and then the entire job flies out. A $100,000 job that we need to invoice comes out of the system in a couple of seconds, where before we were doing that by hand. So some of the productivity that came out of this was we didn't have people sitting around manually typing in timesheet information every week. We didn't have people having to go into our own internal billing system to create a line-by-line detailed invoice for the utility, because everything that we need is already in the ARCOS tool. So we were also able to do revenue recognition, and ultimately through Power BI, a bolt-on product here, we were able to calculate these crew P&Ls that I talked about and make sure that everybody's operating in the green and that we're being as profitable as possible. So in this box, I'd also include, make sure I got the box up there. So in this box of final outputs, I would include, GIS data is coming out of the system, just what do you call generalized work management system data is coming out, and then for contractors, you can customize it, just like I said, and basically spit out anything that you need. So it's a powerful system. It keeps us organized, and we had really good reception from our foremen to it once they realized that we were taking work off them, not adding work to them. So I would say that from Volt Power's perspective, the ARCOS tool is an amazing core tool. We dealt with, how do you get things in, how do you get things out, and once we got our heads wrapped around that, in conjunction with our partners at ARCOS, we were able to figure that out. So I can actually stand up here and say, it's a pretty easy in, it's a pretty easy out, even though when you're dealing with 30 different formats, 30 different utilities. So rather than keep talking, let's show you some stuff.
This should magically appear up there, or up there. There we go, cool. Just a little shout out to the tech team in this room. They didn't realize I was going to present off this iPad, and they had all of this hooked up in 90 seconds. So thank you so much, that was amazing. So a lot of what David said is going to come out through the presentation here. This is a really big room. Feel free to ask questions, though. This is very interactive. We started some Test Drive Alley with this stuff already, so anybody who wants to get a deeper dive, just come and find me, and we'll do demonstrations outside in the parking lot. We'll go and do some construction near the beach and stuff like that. So please do ask as we go through. All right, the first thing to say is that that ticket that David mentioned, here's a sample of it. So this is a work ticket that's come through. Even though this is a fully electronic system, that unit catalog that David mentioned is all on board this device, we're wary of the fact that we want people to adopt the system. So everything they're used to, we also package in here as well. So all the original project documentation that David mentioned is also shown here. So if I want to take a look at the stakeout sheet, for example, the designs, I have them all here as part of the ticket. I don't need to request those. They all come across whenever I need them. Any permitting information, for example, is all on board the device as well. There's no limit, in fact, to what we can attach here. Even the original job instructions are all presented here as well. You don't need to look at those, but they're there. And ironically, they're all editable. So if you wanted to still redline the old way, you can do that. Obviously, you don't need to in this case. More information about the job is here as well, but the main information is all held inside this list. And this is the list of all of the construction I have to do at this location. So this is a sample hardening job where we're actually taking a large overhead line and we're putting it underground. So a lot of removals in here. But every one of these steps or points, I can open it up and I can see what I have to do at this location. First thing we can do, as David said, is we can take a photograph. So there's a photograph of you guys.
Steve, let me just make a comment about the photograph, because I've heard in the conversations today, gosh, should we use iPads? Should we use mobile phones? I was running a training in Florida for some of our FPL crews, and I had a young foreman stand up and say, I want them both. And I asked him, well, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I'm using the same Apple ID on my cell phone as I am my iPad, and therefore I can connect my camera rolls through iCloud so that any picture that I take on my cell phone becomes visible on my iPad. So I leave my iPad in the truck. I've always got my cell phone in my pocket. I take whatever pictures we need, and then when I get back into the truck, I just use the second icon on there on the far right, the one that looks like a picture, and I just go into my camera roll, maybe I annotate the photo, I write on it with my finger, and then boom, I send it up into the system.
If I click that, that accesses my personal camera phone, so I'm not going to do that here. But actually, that's a really great point that David mentions, and that actually goes throughout all of the sessions that we're working on here. Everything you've heard so far, this app can go offline, right? So it's 100% functional offline, including access to that catalog. However, when it is offline, it does cache. It's got a local relational database, secure relational database on the device. But when it gets a signal, like I've got a signal now, it's transmitting all of that information. So anything I do here is pretty much instantly available on here as well. And that's great, actually. And we've seen that happen in the field, where you may have the iPad in your truck, but you may actually just go out, leave the truck. If you need to access the information, it's all on your phone. Same with photographs. Like David said, everything's transferred between the devices. All right, so what can we do here? This is the traditional set of instructions. We can just look at any one of them. I can make changes to these, so I can write up or write down the quantities on any one of these steps just by clicking on it. So I can say, well, actually, that's 2 of those. I can put a note in here if I wish. As soon as I do that, this is haloed now in pink to show that I've actually made a change to the design. So those initial job instructions that came with this have now changed. We've got a later breakout session. I can never remember all these we've got so many. But one of them is on materials reconciliation, and that's really important. We're going to cover this again there, where we have storerooms who are now expecting certain parts back, or we need more parts. This is a key part of that, and I'll go over that later. If I wish to mark off as I'm going through here, I've completed stuff, real simple. I'm just literally just swipe. I can say I've done this. If I make a mistake, I can swipe it again, uncomplete it, etc. So real simple to go through here. If there's a part that's missing completely, so I need to do a traditional red line, I'm not going to get a pen out. I'm not going to mark up the drawing. I'm actually just going to click on this little button here and select from my compatible unit library. Now, if you're a large utility and you've got different units for different parts of the organization, that's fine. Because just like David said, David's challenge was he was working with multiple utilities, so everyone has a different parts table, different compatible units. But even within a utility, you could have that as well. So AEP SWEPCO may be slightly different to AEP in Ohio. So I pick the unit I want. I can either just, at this point, I could talk into the device, but unlike the Louisiana accent that Darren mentioned earlier, my English accent is a little difficult for the computer to understand, so I'm just going to type instead. So I can type in here, I'm going to start typing Guy. As soon as I start to type stuff, this set of 5,000 units now is looking for anything with the word Guy in it. If I just press a space and just start typing some other thing, replace, now I'm down to 5 units. real simple to find this stuff. If you happen to know a code, you can use the code. If you, anything you know about that unit, you can start typing in and pick the appropriate unit.
Steve, if I could just jump in here with one more thing. What we discovered is that our crews didn't know the units as well as we would like them to. And when we rolled out this system, it forced them to go in here and understand what it was that they were actually billing, how they were generating revenue. And I had one foreman tell me that the best GF he had ever had told him, look, you're running a small business here. You know, you need to keep track of all this stuff. You need to make sure things get billed on time, they get billed properly, that the job is accounted for properly. So one of the demands they made on us right after that is, the app is easy to use. I could train somebody on how to use the app in less than 45 minutes. But then what they wanted was training on the units. Because they'd go out and they'd make some chicken scratch. Hey, I put a transformer on the pole, but they didn't know what it was called in the compatible unit library. So that enabled us to close a gap that we didn't even realize that we had.
And it's so important to close that gap because another key thing here is once the construction is done, this needs to get entered into a GIS system. It needs to get entered into a work management system. If we're already using the same language from that system, right, there's no human intervention. This can go straight into those systems. OK, I could keep going here and marking this thing up. I'm going to go back to the job instructions here, though. And I'm just going to randomly pick one. I'm going to say we've actually completed this one here. Let me just mark off 2 things on it. And I'm now going to go back there and actually going to swipe. As I start to swipe here, it's telling me, hey, you've actually marked a few things off. You really want to complete this, or do you want to partially complete it? If I chose to partially complete it, what that basically means is I'm actually probably going off shift now, or there's another crew involved, and I want to note that I'm actually done with this point for now. It's not complete yet, though. So one big point to make here is that this job, this is a large job, 78 different poles we have to remove here. This can be given to multiple crews. And each crew can see their access, what the other crews have done on their progress. So let me just complete a few things here. I'm going to say that's fully complete. The checking off of the boxes is not mandatory. You could do that back in the truck. It's saying, do you want to complete this? I'm going to say yes, and now it's completed. I'm going to do that again because I want to show you one more thing here. You sure you want to complete this? Yes. This next little icon, this little field here is super important. What this is basically saying is, are you at the location of that construction? Are you actually at the location of that pole? Now, if I said yes, what it does is it stores the GPS point for that particular pole. What that means is not only can this data now go back to work management, but it can also go back to GIS. So if we've got some new construction, and we've got a backlog in GIS of 3-4 weeks, what happens at this point now, no pun intended, is this device recognizes that construction is completed at that particular pole. And that pole is then bounced out to every other device in the field for your whole company. And what that means is you no longer have that 3, 4, maybe 6-week delay in getting the new GIS records through. Everybody, including your contractors, can see work done as soon as it's done. It stays there as a temporary entity. So in fact, let's take a look at that. And you can see on the device here, we've actually got, from that field trip we did with Joel yesterday, we've actually got a couple of poles near the beach there. These are real locations of poles. And they appear on the device now. So this is a partially completed job. It hasn't been energized yet, but we can see not only what you've done, but exactly where was it. And the cool thing about that, this is one of those live demos that you regret doing, but let me just do it anyway. Yep, OK. Can you see that point there, the top one? You can just see that little line coming out. That's the pole. It's super accurate. This is a $200 iPad. There's nothing special about it at all. And that's right on the money. That's good enough for a GIS department. It's actually right on the money. It's with a couple of feet away. So these poles are actually recorded in the correct location. So not only does this now go back to work management, it goes back as a GIS-ready file for a proposed addition into your GIS department. We've got like 7 or 8 minutes left. And I wonder if we've got any questions. and we can take some questions for you guys.
David, this morning Darren commented about adoption being a lot better than expected. Can you just comment on adoption of this? Is it generational, right? Is it different parts of the workforce that are more likely to adopt this?
Anna, that's a great question. So the answer to it is yes, it's generational. A lot of our general foremen and foremen tend to be older. They're kind of aging out of the system. I think everybody's worried, how are we going to backfill those positions? And I spent a lot of time on the side of the road in my hard hat and my little safety vest, sitting with these guys in trucks. And once you got them over their initial fear of, oh my gosh, I've got to use an iPad, they realized it was really quite simple. I mean, look how quickly, kids pick up video games or whatever. This app is really simple to use. I spent more time training in the back office with GFs, showing them how to build a job, how to put the attachments on the job, how to go in there and check for, how much of the work is done. But the foreman training turned out to be really simple. And then what we did was a follow-up with them in the field. They'd all get a field visit from their friendly IT guy who was not the ARCOS police. My job is not to sit there and beat on them for stuff. My job is just to sit there and say, I'm not going to go back and tell anybody what you said. How can I help you? What can I do for you? And when they felt like they had the support, then they were a lot more likely to use the tool. And they realized they had the whole unit catalog there. It was a lot of our older guys that were asking for the training on the units so that they could better understand this stuff. The younger guys, it was more of a competitive advantage. I think, Darren, you mentioned it earlier today, that these guys, they go home and they're on all their technology, and then they go to work and they're using a dinosaur. I mean, we were still using Excel spreadsheets and paper and pencil when we started rolling this stuff out. So these guys are scratching their heads saying, why do I work for you? So it became a competitive advantage to be able to show them this, that we're really thinking about the future, maybe more than some of our competitors were. So.
One of the things we do as well with the user interface is when you receive a job, if you have a construction job or maybe there's some maintenance you have to do or there's some storm work you're doing, the system reconfigures itself just to present you with the tools you need to do that job. So it's always a minimal interface, and it's always highly intuitive for that reason.
And I think just one more point on the adoption question. As I mentioned, we rolled out timesheets as well, and you'll hear more about this in the part 2 discussion. But having that timesheet linked to Crew Manager was vital because our people were putting timesheets in, either writing them on a paper Xerox copy, or they were going to their computer, their laptop, and doing a timesheet in Excel. And with Crew Manager, we're pulling in their most accurate crew composition as well as their equipment. They had to bill, and we invoice time on equipment as well. So that was a huge savings for them. So again, adoption for these guys in the field is driven by reducing their workload, not by giving them slick tools that increase their workload.
The other thing I'll just quickly mention here too is that this is a rather complex job, but access to this compatible unit library doesn't have to be just for major construction. It could be something as simple as a meter swap out or a pole replacement. It means that we can actually start referencing the correct units, and this was driven a little bit by Darren and by Chris earlier as well, that when we come to materials reconciliation and actually knowing exactly what's in the field, access to being able to access this compatible unit library in the field, even for the smallest jobs, is super important, because then we have accurate representation in all of our systems of what's actually been installed out there.
Any other? Okay, got a question over here.
So what you're showing us here works, the workbench for routine planned work.
Exactly.
Now, hypothetically, say that crew's working a mile from a car hit pole. If they go to change all the capital assets at that car hit pole, can it capture that and upload into, can you create all the information in there to generate a new work order?
Exactly, you can. Yeah, so if that pole was already in your GIS system, the crew will immediately be shown what's already there, We don't have to do like-for-like replacement, though. You know, whatever they have available, they would mark off the differences. And anything changed, you'd actually be able to use the tool to say what was actually installed instead. And actually, it's two things that are really not only, excuse me, are you actually marking off what was installed, but the GIS itself may be incorrect. You know, this may be they may have the class of the pole right, but the cross arm's wrong or something like that. And so it's an opportunity when you do have a car hit pole to actually get that record exactly right and get it in the right place. The GIS may be showing that pole across the street or 20 yards down the road. This will make sure that data correction goes back to GIS, not only with what's installed now, but also where it was exactly. Actually, and that's, sorry, one more point. That's actually super important. I mean, your main expense is your people and your skill base as well. And it's expensive to send people out. So when they're out there, we should be capturing accurate data. You know, even if it's an inspection, the fact that this unit knows exactly where those devices are, again, you can correct those GIS records and get those more accurate in the future as well.
Any other questions? We are about at 10 till, which is when we're supposed to wrap up here. I don't know if you guys have a couple of other things you want to say, or
We're good. Let's wrap
feeling
up.
good? Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Please remember there is a survey on the app. If you guys could fill that out and let us know if you have any input or suggestions. We'd really appreciate that. And you can also still submit questions, I think, for an hour. So if you walk out of here and you think of something that you want answered, go to the app and fill it, put your question in there and we'll help you out. So thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, David. Thank you, Steve.